The bells were awake before the city. They tolled from the sept of Baelor with a sound that seemed too clean for this place. Each note poured out like bright water into streets still damp with night. Between the rings, there lay a hush. A held breath that every pigeon and fishmonger and watchman learned to live inside. The bells had rung for kings and coronations and pyres. On this morning they rang for the hour and for nothing at all, and Jaime Lannister climbed the hill toward them with his white cloak sweeping dust along the stones. King's Landing smelled of old fish and damp ash, horse piss and hot bread, the faint ghost of wildfire in mortar. He had known other cities that smelled of salt or oranges or resin. This one was always smoke and secrets. The climb made his shoulder ache, the golden hand cold against the breast of his tunic, despite the day warming so early. The metal bit at him, even when it did not hurt. Pain had a clearer rule than shame. Pain arrived and left, and could be measured. The hand stayed. The steps rose in a fan before the septat. They had been scoured since the riot, scrubbed as if soap could lift memory from stone. And yet he still saw where a man's head had struck and popped like a melon, still saw the small folk gather and swell and break around armored points. He paused, listening. No milling crowd waited. The bells ceased. "Sir," said a boy with hair too long for a septon, sweeping the steps with a willow broom, eyes wide at the white cloak. A young crow fascinated by a hawk. Jaime nodded and climbed. Inside, light fell in bars through tinted glass, cutting the air into blues and greens and diluted crimson. The stranger's altar stood clean and disused. The mother wore 7 roses, white as milk. He could feel the city kneel in the hush. Every work slowed, every voice lowered to be small beneath those 7 faces. Jaime had never loved the 7, but he knew what a hall could do to a man's heart. A hall that magnified your smallest breath until it sounded like truth. He had told himself he would speak to the High Septon before the candles and formalities began, while the day was still raw. He had told himself many things when he left his chambers, when he left the book in its alcove and did not look back at his empty pages. But as his footfalls carried him to the nave, he saw that he was not alone after all. Cersei was there. She sat on the low steps between the crone and the maiden, hands folded in her lap, the green silk of her gown thrown like a pool around her. The woman had always known how to place herself in a room. She had always known how to fill a silence. For a breath he thought she had learned where he would be and had come to stop him. Then she turned her head slowly, as if it took effort, and he saw the red in her eyes, the shell of sleeplessness dipped over them. "Jaime," she said, and in that one word she used his name as a rule, a promise, a reproach. Her voice came soft, so the stones would carry it and change it. "I hoped you would not come." "If I don't," he said, "it will still be morning." She rose and the gown fell like a curtain shaken from the rod. "Talk to me first." He wanted to stand near her and smell her hair. He wanted to step back until the hall made them both small enough to move past. He sighed, and the sigh came back to him from the vault like a ghost. "You've had 20 years of talk," he said. "One day of truth won't break us." "That's exactly what it will do." They stood without touching. She searched his face. Age had not tired her beauty. It had only sharpened it, like a knife honed again and again until the reflection warps in the blade. She had slept little. He could feel it. He had slept less. "They will kill him." She said very carefully, as if stepping across a stream on round stones. "If you say what you plan to say, they will kill him in pieces. Not fast. Not clean. Benchawan." "They will not," he said. The words sounded firm and hollow, and his mouth tasted of old iron. "Mace Tyrell won't allow it, even if the faith would. The boy is their garden now. Gardener's prune." She said, "The realm is tired." Jaime shook his head. "One more war, and it may not stand. You want a men to sit a throne or a cairn of bones? Why must it be this way? She asked. That was not a question from the queen he had known. That was a question from the girl who had laughed in the sept at Casterly Rock when their mother insisted on a second prayer. Because the lies are choking me, he said. Because father is dead. Because the king's guard cloak belongs to a better man than me, and the rock will fall to dust if no man with Lannister blood takes it in his hands. Because I am tired of looking at a boy whose hair is too fair and pretending he is not mine. She flinched as if he had struck her. Do not say that aloud. I must. He saw the fury rise in her like a tide lifting a ship. She had never looked so much like the lion carved over the arch of Casterly Rock's old gate. Proud, trapped in stone, jaws about to close. You would destroy everything we wrote with our lives. For what? A clean conscience? The Father's blessing? Have you gone soft with your milk-water honor? Is this Brienne's doing? The name struck him in a place no armor covered. I do not need a maiden of Tarth to order my soul. No. Cersei's mouth twisted. You need a mirror. Is that what the gold is for? To remind you of what you are? You think if the hand gleams enough it will blind them to the rest. He let her anger flow past him like a river around a rock. His jaw ached. He had practiced what he would say in the night, breathing it into the dark, testing words like blades. None of that made now easier. I am going to stand, he said. I am going to tell the realm what I have done. I am going to ask to be released from my vows. When I am, I will leave for the west and claim the rock. There are debts to settle. There are men there who would rather tear the lion from the walls than bow to Tommen's name. I will keep them from trying. You cannot abandon us, Cersei said. I am not abandoning anyone. I am saving what can be saved. Then? She laughed once, sharp and without any joy. You always loved stories where the man breaks something to save it. She stepped close enough that he could smell the citrus oil in her hair and the night's wine under her tongue. Her hand came up to his golden wrist and stopped, fingers hovering as if she had touched flame there once and learned. Do not, Jaime, she whispered. There are other ways. There are fewer mornings, he said. They stood that way until light shifted on the stones, and the distant door hinges sighed, and footsteps came, and the rustle of robes announced truth become public. The High Septon did not come alone. He came with 3 of his thin septons about him like reeds around a rock, and behind them a cluster of barefoot penitents with cords about their waists and eyes that had learned to look at floors more than faces. Beside that procession glided Lord Pycelle and Kevin Lannister, and one of Mace Tyrell's fat men with a lap full of lace, his face striving to look uninterested. Jaime moved from his sister as if parting curtain from window. Cersei's chin lifted. The whole took their nearness and poured it into something other people could drink. Your High Holiness, Jaime said, and felt his mouth shape the title he did not respect. He went down on one knee before the robed figure, and the stones pressed into his kneecap through the leather. The discomfort was necessary, he told himself. A ceremony without discomfort was only a play. What brings the realm's sworn shield into the light so early? The High Septon said. He had the measured voice of a man who had spoken many rites and learned how to bend syllables to the air. Is there a danger to the king? Yes, Jaime said. There always is. Today I have come for a danger of a different sort. A danger I carry. A murmur ran through the penitents, small as mice in straw. Kevin's face did not change. He had Tywin's gift that way. Cersei did not breathe. He felt that too. Jaime rose and stood, and with his left hand, the good hand, the honest hand, as Brienne would call it, if she allowed herself such poetry, he unclasped the brooch at his shoulder. The pin made a simple sound against the hook, like a small stone tapping glass. He took the white cloak in his fingers and shook it once to free it from the pin. It fell over his arm heavy as a river. I have come to lay down a burden, he said. A burden I took when I was young and proud, and thought myself already a song. I swore to protect the king, his secrets, his body, his children. I swore not to hold lands or father's sons, to be no man's husband and no woman's father. Those vows I have broken. And so, now the hall changed. The air went taut. The mother looked down without pity. I served King Aerys, he went on. And I killed him. I did it to save a city he would have burned, and I would do it again. I have borne that name in my mouth since. Kingslayer, I accept it. I speak it here not to seek absolution, but to anchor what else I must say. I have served the boy who sits the throne now. I love him. I love him. I love him as a father loves a son. There were 700 ways to say that sentence, and he had practiced them all, but in the end, it only needed to be simple. Sound made a different sound when truth entered it. A cough behind him died unborn. Someone's beads clicked and stopped. Pycelle's chin trembled like a thin curtain in a draft. He did not look at Cersei. He did not look at Kevin. He looked at the stone behind the High Septon's shoulder and imagined it a small, ordinary rock on a Lannisport jetty, gray and warm with sun. I fathered the children of Queen Cersei, he said. I fathered Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen. I broke the vows of my cloak to do it. I lied, and I let others lie for me, and I let 1,000 men die for the lie. I cannot keep it. I will not. Then, the High Septon's breath came in like a wheeze someone had taught to be a prayer. These are grave sins. Yes, Jaime said. And you think to wash them away with words? No, Jaime said. With deeds. He folded the white silk over his arm, and because some gestures demanded to be whole, he went to the father's altar and laid the cloak across it. The cloth spread innocent a moment, then remembered everything it had covered. Screams in rain, laughter in a bed, his hand steady on a boy king's shoulder when the boy shook. He straightened and placed the golden hand upon the white, and let the metal weight the fabric down. I ask release from the king's guard, he said. I ask it so that I may take up the lordship of Casterly Rock, to put our house in order, and take it from this court where it has made too much ruin. I ask it for the realm's peace. I make no defense of what I am. Silence flowered vast and cold. The High Septon closed his eyes and did not speak, perhaps wanting to hear if the seven would do his wretched work for him. Cersei moved at last. One step, a small rustle of silk, and Mace Tyrell's man lifted an eyebrow like a portcullis. Kevin said, in a voice that belonged to a winter field, "You will destroy the boy." "I will do everything I can not to," Jaime said. "I will bend my knee to him before the court and call him king until my tongue is ash. There are ways to keep what must be kept, uncle. If the faith needs some manner of penance, then it can take it from me, not from Tommen." "The faith is not a potter," the High Septon murmured, finally opening his eyes. "It does not take clay and set it as you wish. The faith has taken worse and made do," Kevin said, a cool glance slipping toward the Septon. "And less. We all live off leavings these days." Cersei had not spoken. She did not, even now. She seemed to have set a crown of ice upon her head, one the sunlight could not find. Her hands were empty. That frightened him in its way more than any dagger might have. The High Septon lifted his staff and tapped it between the seams of the tiles, a small sound to make men lean in. "If I release you, it is not only your oath that breaks," he said. "It is a precedent that shatters. You would leave the king short of one sworn protector, and the city without the lion that has so long kept it from the wolves. The lion's paw has crushed as much as it protected." Someone murmured behind Lace. The Tyrell man's lips did not move. "Release him," Kevin said. Jaime looked, startled, and found his uncle's gaze already there, steady as a plow's line. "Release him, your high holiness," Kevin said again. "The house needs a lord. The rock needs a hand upon its tiller. The crown needs peace. These confessions cannot be stuffed back up the throat that made them. We must make use." "Nan." The High Septon looked at Jaime a long while, weighing. His eyes were not kind. They had never needed to be. "You will do penance," he said at last. "You will walk barefoot to the city's gates and back, and you will feed 100 of the poor with your own gold each day for 40 days, and you will kneel at the feet of the Father and pray for an hour at sunrise and sunset until the moon wanes twice. And when you leave to take your lordship, you will leave the boy with guards who bend their knee to him only." "Mender." "You have my hand," Jaime said, and wondered whether the jest had been waiting his whole life for this moment to become sour. Cersei's voice cut through then, thin as a drawn wire. The faith will not decide the make of my household. The faith has already decided more, the High Septon said, almost gently. And for a moment, the old man's eyes showed him as he was, a body that hurt when it rose. But I am not the crown. And even the crown is not always the law. The law is older. Pycelle fluttered and deferred and spoke of charters and of old Kingsguard roll calls. Jaime stood and listened, and slow-burning relief and fear warred in him, while the terms were named and set like chess pieces on a board that had no end. He would kneel at the foot of the throne later and renounce before the eyes that mattered. He would give his gold out in bread and chalices and prayers that did not fit his mouth. He would put his head in the city's dust, and if it pleased the gods, they could grind him. When it was done, the morning was much older. Day had filled in between the colored panes and left squares on the stone pale as skin. The Septons shuttered lamps. The penitents whispered close to one another like marsh grasses. The white cloak lay on the father's altar, heavy and still, and his golden hand gleamed like a foolish sun. He turned and found Cersei near enough to touch, though she did not seem to belong to the world of touching anymore. She regarded him as one considers a carving that has just been finished and found wanting. "You leave me with a crown made of nettles," she said. "The realm will take some of the sting," he answered. "The realm eats and never grows full." Her lip quivered, almost invisibly, and she smoothed it smooth. "Do what you like in the West. Build your caves with your conscience and your little truths. There will be no place for you here again." He considered telling her that every place he had ever found was some manner of here. He considered telling her that he did not believe her, because he had come to know she placed threats like stones on the path to make men step where she wished. He said nothing. The gold weighed on his wrist, enough. He left the sept into a light grown hard and bright, and the city met him with the news of him before he had given it leave. Sound traveled quicker than any horse. Faces turned toward the white bundle he no longer wore, and to the hand that no longer hid inside a glove. In the market, a woman selling greens blessed him and spat in the same breath. A boy laughed and was cuffed by his father. A hedge knight bowed with an old grace and did not lift his head again, as if he feared that changing opinions would crack his spine. Jaime sent men to gather provisions, to find horses for a long ride, and a carriage for the bread he must give each afternoon. He sent a page to the kitchens of the Red Keep and one to the docks where Lannisport merchants kept their doubtful cousinships with a city that had never loved them. He climbed the steps to the White Sword Tower because habit had grooves and his feet still knew them, and there the book lay as he had left it. He turned his own pages and found them as white as the cloak folded in the sept. A few words Brienne had spoken in a wet camp came to him, words about all the deeds he would do, and he smiled without humor. He took quill and ink and wrote. He had thought for a year about what to write in that book. Everything seemed too little, too much. In the end, he set down only what would serve a reader who wanted a map rather than a song. Sir Jaime Lannister, son of Lord Tywin, served in the Kingsguard of Aerys II, and Robert I, and Joffrey I, and Tommen I. In the reign of Aerys, slew the king to save the city from wildfire. In the reign of Tommen, laid down his white cloak, confessed his sins before the father's altar, and took up the lordship of Casterly Rock to keep the peace of the realm. He left the last line empty because the book enjoyed cruel jokes, and because an empty line asked for an answer, and because he would be a different man when he returned to fill it. He made his penance. He walked barefoot. The city stones were a mosaic of heat by afternoon and a fine grit by dawn. He felt the little cuts on the balls of his feet and welcomed them, the way a thirsty man welcomes the shape of a cup before water touches it. He fed the poor until his purse grew light, and then he opened another purse. The beggars who came learned his face, and some of them blessed him with a fervor new to their tongues, now that bread lay in their hands, and others took and said nothing, and looked away. He knelt at sunrise and sunset, and did not pray so much as count his breaths, and found, to his annoyance, that counting did something to his heart. On the second week, a group of rough men in plain wool pushed their way to the head of the bread line, their belts heavy with cudgels that had once been chair legs, and somewhere in their eyes lay the pale light of vengeance disguised as righteousness. Jaime saw the cudgels and the cords at their waists and the scabbed knuckles, and he thought, "Ah, there you are." The sparrow's birds were learning to fly. "Brother," the tallest said, "we would speak." "You are speaking," Jaime said. "If you wish bread, get in line." "We wish truth," the man said. "You had that this morning in your porridge," Jaime said, and he smiled a little. And the man did not. "You confess to fathering bastards upon the queen," the tall man said. The word bastards came out like a slap. "The gods will judge." "The gods are slow," Jaime said. "The hungry are not. Some debts come due despite delay," the man said. He reached toward the cart, and Jaime's left hand closed on the cudgel before that reaching hand found the loaf. He did not move fast. He did not need to. Men learn quickly whether a man has moved with weapons longer than they have. "We do not take bread from mouths," Jaime said softly, stepping closer so the 100 ears behind could strain to hear. "We break no hungry man's fast. Step back, or I will make you an example, and I will do it kindly, because kindness is the only thing I will be able to feel for you tomorrow." The man looked into the blue of his one remaining clear eye and blinked first. "This city should not be led by sinners," he said. "This city has never known anything else," Jaime said. And for the first time that week he felt laughter that fit his throat. "Take your bread. Eat it someplace where no one will crush you for it." Bensiel. After, when the sun had gone low and orange fog rose from the river, Kevin came to him in the yard with dust on his dark boots and a face marked by a day of being his brother's brother to men who preferred to ignore the note of it. "It could have been done differently," Kevin said without greeting. "Anything can be done differently," Jaime said. This felt like cutting a rope rather than sawing it. "You will estrange the Tyrells. They were never ours," Jaime said. "They were only near. Tommen? Tommen will have to be king without me nearby to tell him how to hold a quill." "The boy was never yours by law," Kevin said. "By blood, yes. How are we to make law from blood? We've been doing it since the first man painted a boar on a rock and called it his," Jaime said. "We'll do it as we always do, quietly." Kevin looked at him a time that could have been a prayer. "I will hold matters here as best I can." "You were made for that," Jaime said. "I was not." On the morning of his leaving, he went to the throne room early, when the High Septon's formula could fold neatly into the kingdoms. Tommen sat small and damp-eyed on the throne that had never been built for someone who did not bleed easily. Marguerite Tyrell stood behind him like a statue of a summer goddess placed in the wrong hall, and her eyes were full of brightness and hidden arithmetic. Cersei did not come. Or rather, Cersei did not present herself for the spectacle, which came to the same. "Sir Jaime," Tommen said, in the brave voice. "Boys find when they must. You kneel to us." Jaime knelt. He had knelt to madmen and to good men, to boys and to corpses. He had never knelt to his own son. The floor smelled of beeswax and the faint copper of old spilt blood. He bowed his head low until his neck hurt. "I kneel to you, my king." "You lay down your cloak," Tommen said. And the boy's voice wavered, and Jaime's heart moved in his chest like something discovering that it still could. "You take up your lordship in the west. You go with our blessing." "No." Jaime lifted his head and looked at the boy. For a heartbeat he wanted to stand and say something soft and ruinous. Instead he said, "I will serve you better from a distance than I ever could close by." "You will write to me," Tommen said suddenly, child shoving King aside for a gasp. "Tell me what the sea looks like from the rock." "Mother says it crashes all night." "It does," Jaime said. "It speaks. I will write." He rose, and the throne's iron shadows made a cage on the floor at his feet, and he stepped out of it without stumbling. He rode 2 days later, after finishing the last of the bread, and the last of the prayers, and after packing his household goods into stout trunks, whose brass had been polished thin by men long dead. 100 men went with him, Westermen bound for home after too many months in a city that saw them as full purses with arms. Adam Marbrand met him at the Lion Gate, his hair a bright banner, his grin sharp as always. "You've made noise," Adam said, reining in beside him. "It will echo all the way to the Golden Tooth." "Noise is what's left when silence has been used up," Jaime said. He spurred his gelding forward and felt the city fall behind like a fever breaking. They took the gold road through country that smelled of hay and warm clay. The fields lay thick with barley, and the peasants in them looked up and shaded their eyes as the little column went by. At the first inn past the Roserat Fork, a bard with strings too new on his lute began a song about a lion who laid down a pelt and found a rock. He stumbled with his rhymes, and Adam tossed him a coin out of pity and told him to learn the old songs before he tried to write new ones. The road rose and fell and rose. They passed banners that had once followed Tywin Lannister into battles he made look like accounts, and now they followed Jaime in a different sort of campaign. At night, when the camp smelled of onions and leather and horses, he dreamed of water in dark corridors and woke before the dawn. He rode early, letting the day catch him slowly, letting the new shape of his life settle where the old had been. As they crossed the Mander's northern fork, a raven came from Lannisport with a seal he knew as well as his own name. He broke it and read. Lord Lefford offered formal words about the honor of receiving his liege. The words wore a nervousness like a thin smell. The gold at the rock had not been as reliable as old songs pretended, not for years. Mines did not run forever. Men did not either. He thought of his father's ledgers, the columns of numbers that had kept wars fed and men clothed, and singers frightened. He thought of Tyrion's hands stealing candles from candelabra to melt their fat for letters. He closed the message and put it cleanly in the leather tube again. "We'll make do," he said aloud. And Adam looked as if he had answered a question they had not yet reached. They crested a ridge near dusk, 2 weeks later, and the west opened like a book he had read 1,000 times and feared he had forgotten. The far line of the sunset sea began as a dull, hard blue, and the light stood upon it like a rim of hammered steel. The land rolled toward it in folds of green and gold. Ships in Lannisport harbor pricked the water like sewing needles. Beyond the city, the rock rose not as a mountain rises, with wildness and age, but as a fortress that had taught itself to be stone. Its face caught the evening light, as if it remembered him, and wished to be remembered in turn. He had played in those caverns as a boy, running with Cersei. Slipping where the spray left the stones slick, laughing when guards slipped too, and tried to curse like men allowed to be heard. He had watched his father walk the high galleries with a silence that made every step sound like a calculation. He had hidden behind pillars and imagined himself lord. He had worn the white cloak and believed that it was an answer to the child who had hidden. The gates stood open. They had been polished to a tired gleam, and the lion's head above them had lost a chip of a tooth to some winter's frost. Men bowed their heads as he passed. Women did too, and children because they saw their parents do it. Lord Lefford waited in the yard with a circle of captains and stewards and legersmen, each clutching the tool of his use. "My lord," Lefford said, voice even. He was a narrow, careful man who never wore the same tunic twice when coming to meet a lord. Today, it was brown with a stitch of gold. He would never have worn to a hunt. "The rock welcomes you home." "Home," Jaime said, and the word settled in his mouth like something old and rough that softened as it warmed. He swung down from the saddle, and his feet knew the angle of the yard stones. The sea air moved over his face like a hand. They walked through halls with ceilings carved into lances of stone that could break sky. Torches lit a corridor that bent twice for no reason a soldier would love, but every reason a builder of strongholds would. The lion's mouth opened on his left, and the sound of the sea breathing in it met him like a greeting he had heard since he first learned what his name meant. He went to the balustrade and looked down into the dark. Salt rose and hit his face. He could taste it on his lip. Far below, the tide moved in and out of caves his ancestors had widened, rooms the sea had taught them to fear, and then learned to leave alone. "Accounts," Lord Lefford was saying behind him. "Ever practical, ever ready to dull the poetry of arrival with the prose of continuance. We have much to review. The Pendrick vein in Mine 4 has cooled to a trickle. We struck water in Mine 2's lower level, We can pump it at cost. The city's shipwrights have been pressing for loans to fit 2 galleys in the southern slip, and if we decline they will take coin from other hands. House Crakehall has been slow with its levy. And there is the matter of Fair Isle. Fair Isle, Jaime said, turning, belongs to Farman's and the Wind as ever. Lord Farman wishes a word about certain treaties, Lefford said, which meant, as it always had, that a man wanted gold, and had found a sentence that might ask for it, without saying the simple word. We'll give him words, Jaime said. If words don't serve, we'll give him terms. If terms don't serve, we'll give him guests and wine. If wine doesn't serve, then we'll see about ships. Lefford inclined his head the way a man bows to a plan that has not yet failed. And the faith, he ventured. The High Septon has begun sending letters to the west regarding penitence. There are voices, my lord, who would prefer to make a show of righteousness. The west has always preferred shows that end in feasts, Jaime said. We will give the faith what it needs to keep its belly warm. We will not let it come here with cudgels. Lefford hesitated. They may not need cudgels to move hearts. Some hearts move when a bell rings, whether they wish to or no. Then we'll ring bells of our own, Jaime said, and he touched the golden hand lightly against the balustrade, as if to say, I know I wear some of my failures on my sleeve. Where is the hall? I will eat. I will sleep. Tomorrow we will count our debts and our friends and see if we can increase one by paying the other. The great hall had tapestries faded to a palette the old weavers never intended. Lions who looked as if their blood had been washed from the wool by too many suns. He remembered when his father changed them. He remembered asking, once, whether one could make a tapestry that did not fade. His father had said, You can build walls and coin debts, boy. Cloth is for women and smoke. Jaime had thought then that he would like to be a man who loved smoke. He had become a man who lived inside it. He ate roast kid and barley heavy with fat, and drank a wine that tasted of plums that had had enough of the tree. He slept in a bed that remembered his weight with more mercy than his chair in the White Sword Tower ever had. He woke before dawn with the sound of waves etched into the base of his skull, as if he had been given his own heartbeat back after years of borrowing the cities. The day met him with ledgers and men. Stewards spoke. Captains stamped with impatience. A woman from Case, with ink on 3 of her fingers and a mouth that did not waste words, explained why the salt trade had thinned. Letters came like a summer rain, polite, imploring, bitter, sly. He learned at noon that a band of broken men along the Gold Road had taken to calling themselves the Father's Fist and waylaying caravans in the name of tithes. At sunset he stood with his palms on the great table that had once served as Tuin's altar, and saw that the carving under his hand was a lion's tail, not a river. He smiled at being wrong and did not hide it. When he was alone he went to the galleries over the sea. The spray came up in rare bursts that spattered his cheeks. He closed his eyes and felt the air peel the city from him, layer by layer, until what was left felt raw and clean. He remembered Aerys's breath in his nose and the way the king's voice had scaled upward when he was angry, a shrillness that did not match his words. He remembered Bran Stark's small body falling through air and the sound it did not make when he struck. He remembered the look on Tyrion's face when Jaime set him free and gave him a truth in payment that had been a knife. I will yet be a better man, he said to the water, softly so that no steward could put it in a report, or at least a newer one. In the morning men brought him steel. A chest of armor that had hung in a corridor since before he left had not grown any lighter, but a new cuirass had been hammered to suit his chest that was not the chest he had worn at 18, and the blacksmith had taken his measure with respect for scars. The hand, the smith had asked, squinting at the gold, as if it were an insult. Do you want a glove? No, Jaime said. I am tired of gloves. There were petitions to hear after that. A stonemason whose grandson had been pressed into some levy and never returned. A fisherman who swore the city's new tariffs made his nets good only for catching promises. A woman from the hills beyond Tarbeck granaries, wearing a shawl woven with a pattern his mother had loved, who asked leave to keep goats on land men had been paid to forget in a generation of revenge. He listened and remembered what Tywin had taught him. A lord who answered slowly paid less later. He heard himself give judgments a version of the man he had killed would have approved. Simple, hard, fair when it could be, and merciful when it would be cheaper. But he also heard himself ask for names and details, and where a man's father had stood the day the rains went down in water. The asking made a shape in the air. People left looking confused by gentleness they had not expected, and heartened by bluntness that let them plan. At the end of a long line, a boy waited, angry in that particular way. Only boys whose anger is a new suit feel, big in shoulders he hadn't earned yet. "My father says to tell you that our town will not send grain," he announced, before being asked to speak, pushing his lip out so it would not tremble. "He says the lion has taken enough, and this year he can chew his own tail." "What is your father's name?" Jaime asked. "Tummel," the boy said with pride as if that were a banner. "And what town?" "Clegging's Fen," the boy said, and then folded his arms, daring him to punish. There were a dozen ways to answer. The one that came was not one he would have found a year ago. "Tell your father the lion needs grain to feed a host it is trying not to summon," Jaime said. "Tell him also that if the lion must come to Clegane's Fen, he will not chew his tail. He will take the heads off men who prefer clever sayings to tithes." The boy blinked. "I will tell him," he said, less angry because he had been met at the exact edge of his bravery. "Eat it before you ride," Jaime said, and signaled to a steward. "Your horse will go farther that way." When the hall emptied, and the lions on the tapestry watched him with dim-stitched eyes that could not accuse, Adam came in smelling of horse and wind. "Riders 3 days north," he said. "A small company, well-shod horses. Pennon we could not read, could be a 7-point star." He grinned the way men grin when news matches what they had been hoping for and fearing both. "The faith sends us callers." "So soon?" Jaime murmured. "When bells ring, they echo fast across a land without mountains," Adam said. "Do you want me to greet them with poetry or spears?" "Neither," Jaime said. "We will greet them with bread and terms. If they prefer poetry, they can bring their own. And if they prefer spears, then they will learn that the rock's caverns are very good at turning spear shafts into kindling," Jaime said. He went to the balustrade again because that had become his habit, expecting some answer to climb to him from the breath of the sea. It did not, because the sea gave few answers, and those it gave were always the same. But it steadied him. That night, he walked alone down a stair that spiraled into a cold the torches had never learned to love. The chamber below had been cut when the first Lannister to be called Lord decided he would make a holdfast from cliff, not hill. It was a room for speaking to himself. He liked it because no one else did. He put his back to the stone and let the cold creep from it into the cloth at his shoulders, into the place where the metal wrist gripped him. He thought of his sister cooling her fury with plans. He thought of Tommen's hand small on the arm of the Iron Throne. He thought of a tall woman with eyes the exact blue of a northern noon, riding through green country with a sword across her back and a purpose so clean it could cut air. "Come," he said to the empty room, and wondered whether he meant the faith, the future, or the man he might become. He smiled at not knowing. There was time yet for choosing, and he had always been impatient. He would learn patience as he had learned everything else worth keeping. With pain in it. In the morning light struck the sea in sheets of white. Bells in Lannisport called men to market. Somewhere in the yard below, a young hound barked at the shadow of a kite. Jaime walked through his own house and felt the floor give back to his steps, the resonance of stone that had been walked by men who built with duty and cruelty, and numbers and fear. He had built with less. He would build now with whatever lay to hand. Gold when it was left. Men when they were brave. Words when they were true. Lies when they must be told to stop a greater lie from swallowing the line he had drawn in his throat this morning, in the Sept of Baelor. When the riders came from the north at midday, they bore the 7-pointed star on linen too new to have the right creases. And their leader had the careful eyes of a man who does not trust his horse or his god, but knows he must ride behind both. Jaime met them in the lower yard, where the air smelled of iron. He wore no cloak, and the golden hand caught sunlight and did not release it. Lord Lannister, the man said, dismounting without offering to remove his sword, which told Jaime as much as any sermon would. We come on behalf of the High Septon. Welcome to my house, Jaime said, and he smiled in a way that could be mistaken for warmth if a man wished to be fooled. Are you hungry? We are here to speak of penance, the man said. Men speak better after meat, Jaime said. I have found it so. The father may disagree. He has never had to ride a day with only a handful of raisins to fill his belly. The Septon glanced at the men behind him, counting whether he had more spine than riders. He yielded a fraction. Bread then, he said. Bread and salt, Jaime said. And then we'll speak of how one pays for truths told, and whether the coin can be something other than a boy's blood. He waved them into the shade. The day leaned into afternoon. The sea breathed. In the great hall above, maps lay rolled and waiting. Down in the city beyond the wide curve of the bay, 1,000 men fed their families and wondered what songs would be sung about lions wearing new skins. In the yard, the Septon bit into bread as if to show the gods he feared no crumbs. Jaime sat opposite him and folded his arms across a chest, now armored not in white silk, but in leather that had chosen function over display. He let the minutes stretch. Penance and policy, hunger and habit, truth and what could be born. These things would take time to bend into a shape. He was not the man for patience, but he had decided to be the Lord for it. Begin, he said, when the bread was nearly gone. Tell me what must be paid, and I'll tell you what can be paid. And between us we will make something that keeps more men alive than dead. The Septon lifted his chin. His eyes were not soft. You think this is bargain, he said. I think everything is, Jaime said. Even the gods bargain. Why else would they make men want to live? The man's stare did not flinch, and a small, reluctant respect appeared there like a coin found in old straw. Now, Jaime thought, feeling the slow turn of some great wheel begin, we will see whether I am the kind of man who can stand outside a city and keep it from burning without cutting down its king. We will see whether I can be a lord without being a liar, or if the only way to hold a crumbling wall is with my back against it and my mouth full of mortar. He had the taste of salt on his lips still. He licked it away. He listened. Night came to the rock slowly, dragging with it a fog that laid wet fingers on stone. He left the Septon to the hospitality of the stewards, and went again to the lion's mouth to watch the black water slip and insist, chewing at the cliff with patience born of geologic certainty. For a while he saw his reflection in the water. It made him look younger, as reflections do when they are not disturbed. Then a wave moved through it and made the face not his. He thought of Cersei's blank look. He thought of Tommen's damp eyes. He thought of Tyrion, ghost brother at his shoulder even now, small as a boy and then smaller, until the shape was not there at all, and the place it had been felt emptier for a moment before becoming simply more air. He said none of their names. He did not touch the metal at his wrist or the place where the cloak had hung. He stood and listened to the rock breathe. Up in the hall, men set candles to maps. Men rolled dice in a guard room on a board scratched with squares by the point of a dagger. Men talked of the faith and of grain and of ships and of a boy king whose smile made them want to give him a dog and teach him to hunt oranges. Jaime took a long breath and felt that the air he drew belonged to him. He did not need to prove that to anyone. He would have to prove other things to many people, and some would doubt until the day he died, and some would doubt past it, and some would never have the luxury of doubting, because they would be dead before doubt occurred to them. He could live with that. He had lived with worse. He turned from the sea and began to walk the corridors left to him by men who had never imagined a lord would someday wear gold where his flesh had been, a lord who would empty his mouth of old lies and fill his house with new quiet. When he reached the hall again, the Septon was there, hands clean of crumbs, ready to name his terms. Jaime sat and listened. The night went deep, and the rock held. He would hold with it, as long as his back could take pressure, and his mouth could make bargains, and his heart could remember what it had done and what it refused to do anymore. In the slow room under the cliff, the sea kept breathing. A king slept in a city that had once smelled of wildfire. A queen planned. A woman of Tarth rode north. In between those things was a man with a lion on his breast instead of a cloak on his shoulders, and he had chosen to stand. They began with a list, because holy men love lists. The septon's parchment rasped when he unrolled it. A dry sound like a snake across stone. He named 12 resurrections of ruined septs and 6 almshouses. A school for orphans to learn their letters, a hospital for the winter flux, and a tithe levied on each ship, leaving Lannister to be paid in grain or coin. He spoke of men hunger-sharp in the villages north of the Gold Road. He spoke of sin as if it had weight you could carry with both hands. Jaime let him finish. He did not interrupt even when the man slid from supplication into command, and the word levy began to stand too straight. When the list lay panting at last, he took a piece of bread himself and bit it, slow, to make the man feel the pause. "I won't give you cudgels," he said. "You want to feed the hungry, I'll pay for it. We'll rebuild your septs if the lords whose men burned them will admit as much with silver. I'll put teachers in Lannister who can turn a dockboy's mouth into more than curses. But no man in cords collects coin with a staff in his hand. No man wearing your star will stop a wagon without leave from a sworn bailiff of mine." "Ben, the faith has its rights," the septon said, color creeping up through his beard like fire through thatch. "So does my people." Jaime leaned forward, elbows heavy on the trestle. "I'll not have another army raised under another name. The last ones left graves behind, and I have no taste for new names on new stones." "No. You speak as if piety were a blade. It is, used wrong." Jaime turned his gold and watched it catch a slice of sun and throw it back onto the septon's brow. "I will give you bread for bellies and roofs for prayers, and coin for honest work. You'll give me peace. If any of your poor fellows think to play tollkeeper on my roads, I'll break that game with oak and iron. And I'll do it myself if I must, because it seems I end things cleaner with my own hands than when I trust other men to do it." "Nah." The septon studied the metal, and then his face, testing whether this lord from songs truly meant to stand in mud. At last he inclined his head, reluctance pinching his mouth. "There is also the matter of the queen. Of the boy. There is the matter of what the realm can bear," Jaime said. He did not blink. "You have what you need to remind the queen what sin costs. A walk, perhaps, or a prayer with bare feet on cold stone. You won't have the boy. You won't unmake a king made by law and oath because I open my mouth like a fool in a hall that likes to magnify foolishness. We'll trade in penances I can pay. You'll leave Tommen where he is. Strike the child and you'll loose every sword in the West, not for love of law but because men hate to see boys hurt who have never had the chance to become bastards proper." "Nebiru, harsh metaphors are not arguments," the septon said. "They are when men like me hear them," Jaime said. "He ate your bread." They haggled an hour longer, not over the boy. That he would not haggle over, but over the number of loaves and rafters and apprentices' fees, over whether ship tithes would ruin the fleet before it could be made better than it was. In the end, the septon took parchment with a lion stamped in red wax, and rode away with a face arranged into displeasure that did not conceal satisfaction. People like to feel wronged when they have won. Jaime had learned that years ago in a tavern with Tyrion, where dice had fallen the wrong way for everyone but them. After the horses had gone, he stood in the yard with Adam and watched the North Road, a brown seam stitched across green. "He'll send letters with sharper edges when he writes from safety," Adam said. "They always do." "They do," Jaime said. "We'll see whether paper can cut stone." He wrote his own letters that evening. One for Kevin, blunt and spare, laying out the terms won and the terms refused. One for Lord Lefford to be sent to Cornifield, wrapped around orders to see the Golden Tooth provisioned as if winter lived there. One for Lord Farman, promising a league to protect fishing waters if fair tolls were kept and shipwrights left in peace. He wrote a different letter for Tommen. "My dear king." He stopped and scratched through dear and wrote it again, smaller. "My dear king, you asked what the sea looks like from my windows. It is not the same water you crossed to leave the city with your eyes wet that morning. It is older, or it pretends to be. In the afternoon it is hammered metal with light, lying flat on it, as if a giant threw silver down and forgot to pick it up. At dawn, it is a color that does not have a name I know, something between steel and milk. At night, it is a voice, and not a thing. You can hear it in the corridors, low and patient. And if you sit with it long enough, it will tell you that everything ends in one kind of quiet or another. And that is not a dreadful thought, if the quiet is one you chose. He halted and stared at the ink. He could taste the peril of telling a boy about endings. He chose another road. I have not yet found the bottom of its mouth. They call the cave beneath us the lion's mouth, and they mean it like a boast. But when the tide is high, the sound coming up is not a lion's roar. It is breath. A lion makes his noise all at once and then is still. The sea never stops. You must eat well and sleep when you can, and listen to people when they speak to you, even if they bore you, because sometimes a truth hides in a dull man like a coin in straw. Be kind when it costs you little. Be hard when it will pay you back in lives. If men argue before you, make them speak slowly, and never let them use too many names for one thing. If a man calls a tax a gift, he is trying to steal. When you are wrong, say you are wrong. Your subjects will forgive you if you do it rarely and never about the same mistake twice. They will not forgive you if you pretend to be a god in a city that knows what gods smell like when they burn. This is a great deal to write at once. I will write less and more often. If any kitten troubles your sheets, call him Sir Pounce and knight him. Knighthoods given to cats trouble no one. Your old knight? Jaime of Casterly Rock. He sanded the page and sealed it before he could name himself something else. The wax took the lion cleanly. For a little while he watched the cooling pool find its edge, the exact moment where liquid turned to a thing that would keep its shape. Mornings turned into a habit of training, not because he would lead charges like a green boy, but because men watch how a lord carries his failures. He took his left hand to the yard and turned his shoulder again and again under weight, until muscle complained and then obeyed. Hareth Hill, a big-shouldered man from Casey, with a nose bent twice by love or war, and a laugh that never came at the right time, took up a blunted sword and beat him like rain. Jaime learned to catch strokes with the edge of his metal, and to make the gold a wall. When he could not make his steel quick enough, the smith made ridges along the palm, and two small horns on the back of the hand, to grip a shield in a crush, or to spike a man's wrist, if he grew too bold reaching. The first time Hareth slid a cut toward the gold, and hurt his edge skate, and nick his own knuckles in recoil, he grinned broadly and bowed. "A hand that bites," he said. "I have seen worse saints." He did not become the swordsman he had been. He became something else, and that felt less like loss than it had before. He learned to move differently, and stop lies quicker, and see how men thought when they were afraid of the wrong thing. Stories came in with the dust. A caravan on the gold road waylaid under a painted star. A Westerman lord at the edge of the riverlands balking at sending grain to King's Landing because the Freys snarled at every wagon and wanted a bite from each sack. Adam took 50 riders east a day and a night, and came back with the father's fist wrapped around his saddle in strips, and the caravan's leader returned, 2 fingers poor for foolishness. Jaime rode to watch them hang the worst of the bunch from a stunted oak, not because he loved hanging, he did not, but because the men of 3 villages stood and watched too, and it matters to men to see which duties a lord will put his own eyes to. He sent Davin to the Golden Tooth with 1,000 men and a smith's purse to lay iron along the gate where rock had flaked. He rode out himself to the mines. That was a day of lanterns swaying and voices bouncing off walls and the patient stink of damp stone. In mine 2, the water lay black as a priest's humor, and the pumps clanked like old men rising. Miners stood with caps in hand when he walked past, and one, a boy with the muscle of a man and the face of a child, asked if he truly killed a king. "I did," Jaime said, "because lies were weight, and he had too much of that already. He was about to burn a city. I couldn't let him." The boy nodded slowly, as if he were measuring whether a city was worth a king, and Jaime wondered what number he would have set if the boy had been allowed to count. He set coin aside to sink a new shaft where old maps showed a vein left for bad luck 2 generations ago, because sometimes luck changes and sometimes maps lie. He gave ore to Lannister smiths at a price that let them build hull ribs and hinges without courting loans from men whose ink turned to chains. He sent a grant to a guild of glassblowers to set up in a warehouse along the canal, because windows can change a city's temper as surely as laws, and a man who wakes to light is less likely to stab. On the 20th day, a raven came from the capital, ragged with speed and the stink of fear. Kevin's square hand had written it in cramped lines, as if the words wanted to force themselves through too narrow a slot. Tommen is safe. The High Septon presses. He wants the Queen for penance and whispers for trial. I have persuaded the Tyrells to be patient. They are not a patient people. Margaery writes letters that say everything and nothing, and call themselves flowers. There is talk in small council of the law presumptive. Children born in wedlock are presumed legitimate until a court unmakes them. Your confession complicates. If you can send grain, send grain. If you can send men, send them not to the city but to the tooth. The riverlands fester. I thought you'd want to know that Edmure Tully remains in Frey hands, and the Blackfish harasses the road as far west as Lord Lefford's mills, if our reports are true. Pycelle coughs. I do not. Kate ought. Jaime folded the parchment and stood a while with it in his palm. He could see Kevin's mouth holding down impatience even as ink dried. He could see the High Septon's eyes finding a balance that let him eat both the Queen's humiliation and the Tyrell's sufferance. He could see Tommen staring at a window and listening to advisors' words like rain on slate. We'll send grain, he told Lefford, and cut a swath through the accounts to do it. He sent wagons under banners as unmistakable as a red shout. He fed the drivers well enough that they would not be tempted to sell sacks to freckled men by the roadside with honest faces and dishonest sums. He sent letters to the smaller lords along the Mander's source, reminding them of oaths and adding reasons that had nothing to do with oaths. He sent Davin spies dressed as drovers to count Frey teeth and see whether the Blackfish's shadow stretched as far as men said. He did not send men to the city. He sent a letter instead, not to Kevin this time, but to Margaery Tyrell. Your Grace. He paused, tasting the irony that he wrote grace to a girl whose house had spent 3 generations learning how to put a pedal on a knife. The West will feed the city if the city will let itself be fed. My wagons will go under my banners. If any man lays hands on them without writ and seal, his hands will go in a basket. You will hear talk of laws old enough to be used as if they were gods. Remember that such laws were made by men for other men. They are conveniences dressed grand. Keep the child out of a fight he cannot win. Give the High Septon coins that clink and words that soften. Do not give him flesh. There is a cliff below my window. The sea pounds it every day, and every day the cliff makes a face and pretends it does not notice. But I have seen, in places no one looks, how the water takes a bite so small. It is not even a bite, only a lick. After a while, the cliff is not the cliff it was. Do not let piety sharpen its teeth on your husband. Offer it bread and smiles until you can make other arrangements. J. He sealed that one with red wax too, and wondered whether letters could carry salt on their backs the way horses carry dust. He slept poorly. He woke once, with his heart hammering as if a dream had been running him, and lay listening to the dark breathe through the rock. A song came up from far below. Men in the kitchens, some old thing about sailors and a girl with a blue scarf that never ended well. He let it run through him. When another day began, he found a woman waiting in the hall with her shawl pulled tight and a child at her side. He remembered her goats and the hills, where rains remembered how to hate. She told him 3 men with cords and stars had come at dusk to their village and led away 2 boys for questioning, because they had cut down hazel to make whistles on a holy day. Jaime felt his jaw set. Whistles, he said, as if it were a new kind of sin he had not heard named by any god. They said boys who cut hazel on a day set aside for prayer will take other things. She whispered. They said small sins grow like thorn bushes, and bleed the world. Small sins, Jaime said, and big fools. He called for horses and took 30 men. They rode light through fields smelling of burnt straw, and into hills where the old lines of old fights still lived in the way fields stopped abruptly, and started again as if soil detested memory. They found the 3 at noon by a well where a hawthorn dragged its shadow across dirt. The boys, 1:15, and blooming angry, 1:10, and already learning to wear blankness like a second face, stood with their hands tied in front, as if they had asked to be arrested, and now regretted the politeness. "Unbind them," Jaime said, before the men with cords could speak. "If you bind them again, I will bind you and make you piss yourself before I let you have your breeches." The eldest of the 3 poor fellows squared up, hand inching toward his cudgel, eyes not quite brave enough to hold steady. "We are about the Father's work. The Father can work without your knots," Jaime said. "What writ do you carry? What seal?" "The High Septon's word is not parchment." Jaime cut him off. "If he wants to take boys out from under their mothers for cutting sticks, he can write me and say it plain, and I will write him and say plainer. Untie them." The man hesitated too long, and Adam nudged his horse forward with a movement any fool could read. The cords came off. The boys rubbed their wrists and looked at him with a mix of awe and fear that never sat well on children. He tried to soften his mouth and failed. He turned back to the men and leaned down in the saddle until his golden hand gleamed an inch from their faces. "Listen," he said softly. "This is my land. I have sinned in it and bathed in it and shed blood in it and spilled seed in it and eaten its bread. I will be pious here in the ways I can be pious without hurting boys. If you come to do your God's work, you will take my writ with you. If you come without it, you come as thieves." "We come as the poor," the second said. "The poor are welcome in my kitchen," Jaime said. "Thieves are welcome in my cells." They went away with their eyes doing sums. Boys with hazel whistles went home to a mother whose mouth worked without sound, and then found it and filled the yard with thanks that embarrassed him more than reproach would have. On the ride back, Harith the master-at-arms tamped his pipe and walked his horse next to Jaime's. "The old lords would have had those men flogged," he said after a long while. "The old lords did much I've no taste for," Jaime said. "Even your father?" "Especially my father," Jaime said, and blew out a breath dry as parchment. The weeks laid themselves down one after another like shingles on a roof. The rock took on his weight, and the great glass in the high gallery caught mornings and laid them along the table where maps slept, making rivers out of light. News came like weather. In the east, a man with silver hair had hatched new dragons in a city none of his men could spell. In the south, Dornish letters complained of old wounds, as if they were new. In the capital, rumors flowered and rotted, that the queen would be made to walk barefoot through the city, that the Tyrell men were sharpening their knives in gardens, that the High Septon slept on stones, and ate only bread but somehow had never looked so well fed. He wrote to Tommen again. Shorter. Because he had promised, "Your Grace, when the wind is wrong, the sea smells like copper. When it is right, it smells like nothing at all, which is the cleanest smell I know. Your wagons will have reached you by now. If anyone troubled them, tell Uncle Kevin how many men he has to hang. Do not be frightened when men around you argue. Many men argue because it makes them feel necessary. Make them give you numbers when they speak of costs. Make them tell you where wheat grows and where ships rot. Ask for names. If you are made to pray publicly, pray for me. I believe there is nothing more annoying to a god than to be asked to look down on a man who deserves it less than he thinks. Your knight far from your side. Amy." A reply came back quickly, with 3 lines that felt like a boy sitting on a too tall chair. "I knighted Sir Pounce. He scratched me and ran. I think he is brave. I heard the sea once in a shell. It sounded like you said. I will do the numbers. I will." He read it twice, and then put it in a drawer with the little teeth he had pulled from his mouth as a boy. Evidence that things change, and sometimes it's for the better. Lord Farman arrived in person at last, smelling of salt and indignation, a red scarf wound too tightly at his throat as if to keep his words in until he could spit them at their target. He wanted ports dredged and pirates scourged, and a Lannister standard hoisted on the tower at Faircastle to show protection. Jaime gave him 2 of 3 and sent him away with a purse and a promise and a sense that he had been bested in a game he did not know they were playing until the 3rd move. He stood with a dam on the parapet after, watching gulls knife the air with the lazy cruelty of creatures that never think of hunger unless it's making a noise. "You are making friends," Adam said, amused. "I am making arrangements," Jaime said. "You always liked arrangements less than battles." "I never liked battles," Jaime said, and then smiled sideways. "I liked ending them." A messenger from the Riverlands arrived with mud hardened on his boots like armor. The Blackfish had burned a Lefford mill and vanished into hedgerows before the smoke forgot the first songs it wanted to sing. The phrase had taken 2 small holds and hung boys for banners. Davin wrote that he had the tooth secure, but the country between it and the hills had too many veins to block all of them. Jaime paced a map with 2 fingers. "If Brynden Tully were a gold vein, I'd call him one that shows bright when the light hits and disappears when the torch moves," he said. "Would you go?" Adam asked, knowing the hook in the question. The old impatience rose. The old answer wanted to arrive and make itself known. He kept it out with force. "No. If I ride east, I leave this house to letters. Letters cannot root men out of hills. Davin's the man for it, and he has the patience I am learning. He'll find a way to bore the fish out of his holes." Adam nodded. He was a man who respected patience because it had won him 3 women more than his looks granted him. He received a letter from Cersei a week later, written in a hand crisp enough to draw blood and folded too sharply, as if it had been creased over a metal edge. "You have done what only you could do. You have taken what we made and turned it into a thing we'd never asked for. The High Septon talks of my sins to men who used to talk of my hair. Do you enjoy it? Does the sea applaud you at night for being brave? The boy asks for you. I tell him you are busy and that he is a king. Be a lord of your rock. I will be queen of the air, and Ash left me. When you tire of counting and eating fish and pretending you have a heart, do not come back. The doors here are not large enough for that hand, and the crown you think you do not wear." He did not burn it. He folded it and put it in a box with other things that held pain he could lift when he wished to feel it. He went to the training yard and let Hareth try to bruise him, and Hareth obliged. On a night when fog came low and wet and made the torches hiss, he went again to the low chamber where the Rock's first lord had stood and made plans that later generations called brilliant because they had worked. He set his back to the stone and let the cold bite. He spoke aloud to the empty air because sometimes hearing the shape of a thought makes it heavier. "I will not march on King's Landing," he told the dark. "I will not cut a boy's life to fit the hole I've made. I will not let men with cords make law in my hills. I will feed the poor as long as we have grain and make work where we do not. I will keep the golden tooth bristling until Brynden Tully tires of throwing sparks at wet wool. I will build ships and not trust them to men who have never seen the sea angry. I will make the mines pay, or I will find other ways to make coins sing. I will not let my house grow smaller because I wanted to feel clean." "Ben?" The cold listened and did not clap. He had not expected it to. He climbed the spiraling stair and found dawn turning the sea into pewter. A fair reached Lannisport with carts of bolts of cloth and barrels of olives and a troop of singers who had learned the first crude verses of a song about a gold hand that crushed guilt and fed babies. Jaime rode down on a gray day with no cloak, and the city raised a murmur that was not a cheer and not a hiss. Something more complicated and more useful. He bought a wheel of sheep's cheese from a woman with knives on her belt and distributed it in slices because men believe a lord who cuts his own cheese is closer to a saint than one who has it carried to him on a plate. He listened to a shipwright's son recite a prayer to the smith for a better auger and gave him coin for tools rather than a blessing. He stood by the harbor and watched a line of galleys throw their oars as one and felt a piece of himself move with them in a way it never had when he watched men form for a charge. In the evening, Lannisport lit 1,000 lamps along the quay, and from the high galleries of the rock it looked as if stars had fallen down to see how the poor live. He watched them burn and go out, and he did not move until the last one died and the harbor became the black bowl it had been before men decided to name it. The envoys of the faith returned with a longer list and sterner faces. Jaime received them in the lesser hall with a map behind him that showed the West as a lion all his ancestors had believed. They were drawing a country, and had drawn a myth. They wanted a court of inquiry into bastardy in the West, as if sin had a district. He gave them a school of letters and numbers instead, thick with promises to teach orphans to count grain and not fingers. They asked for the power to police pilgrim roads. He gave them graybeards in his livery with rods and writs, and a promise to add a septon to each watch to scold and soothe. They wanted to collect a silver from each marriage in Lannister. He told them they could have it if they paid a copper to each widow they made. "We will speak to the high septon of your obstinacy," the envoy warned at last, exasperation breaking through. "You will speak to him of my generosity," Jaime said, "and of my knives." The man blinked. "Knives? The knives I have not used on you," Jaime said pleasantly. "Sometimes the absence of a thing is the gift." After they were sent to be fed, Lefford touched his chin and said, "You gamble." "I have always gambled," Jaime said, and ran his thumb along the metal on his wrist. "It's only lately that I've begun to enjoy knowing what I'm staking." A letter from Kevin told of a move made and a move forestalled. The Queen had agreed to walk, to spare her son the worse. The Tyrells had smiled terribly and said sweet words. The High Septon had smiled like a man with bread in his teeth. The city had crouched to watch because cities love to see what they are not allowed to be. Jaime read it once and went to the lion's mouth and listened to water striking stone and wondered whether any woman had ever cut herself so carefully with pride. He dreamed that night of a long corridor lined with faces he had known and failed. A boy in a tower window. A man with a purple mouth. A father who had stopped being alive 2 hours before his eyes remembered to show it. A dwarf smiling around hurt like a jewel set in lead. A woman in blue, standing in a field the wind would not leave alone. He woke tasting salt and angry at himself for dreaming like a fool. By harvest's turn the golden tooth sat fat with provisions, and Davin had run nets through hedgerows until even the blackfish had to leap less. The phrase took to fishing in other waters, and a letter from the twins arrived filled with the grease of a feast and words that pretended to be courtesy. Jaime replied with a note that read as if composed by the absence of threat, and signed it with a lion so clear even Walder's dimmest sun could see the teeth. That winter came early, not from the wall, but from a change in the sea's breath. It lay itself along the hills with a patience the city never learned. Jaime stood on a morning when frost had trimmed every bush with knives, and thought how the cold cut more cleanly than heat. Men moved slower and made fewer mistakes. Smoke went straight up. He called a convocation in Lannisport. Not a court, because he hated the word unless it belonged to the small council room where men at least pretended to bargain, and not a feast, because there was less to drink than men liked to pretend. He called lords and captains and guildmasters and septons to stand in one long room and listen while he said aloud what needed saying, and then let them say things back. The hall smelled of wool and lamp oil and expectation. He spoke slowly, because men listen more when they think you are weighing each word. He named the city's hungers and the countryside's fears. He laid out what the West would give the faith and what it would never concede. He spoke Tommen's name and used the word king where it would do good, and the word boy where it would do more. He looked at men who wanted war and gave them numbers until they looked away. He looked at men who wanted piety and gave them boys with whistles until they were ashamed. When he finished, silence lay heavy. Men looked at each other, counting whether others had heard it the same. Lord Brax coughed and proposed a tithe on wine that would go to poorhouses in lean months. Lord Craighall grunted and promised men at the tooth without arguing their pay. The master of the Lannisport Shipwrights Guild asked for timber rights upriver. No one had used since a marsh war 3 kings ago. Jaime gave it to him with a steward's flourish and a warning about bribes that made 2 men in the back shift their feet. When the hall emptied, a boy lingered by the door and worked up the courage to approach. He wore a red cap new enough to itch and carried a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. "My father said to bring this," he muttered. For the hand." Jaime blinked. The boy unwrapped the bundle to reveal a glove made of some clever joining of boiled leather and iron rings. built to fit over the gold, and shaped so a blade sliding down would cant away. He said if a man has to wear a thing he did not choose, it better be a thing that works. Your father is a smith, Jaime said, and the boy nodded, proud. He is. He said to say he's not looking for a contract, only for the chance to make something that lasts. Jaime slid the contrivance over the gold and flexed. The pins hummed, an insect's song of function. Tell him to come to the gate tomorrow. I am looking for both. Snow came and covered mistakes. The rock stayed dry in its belly and wet on its face. The mines breathed steam. In King's Landing, the Queen walked. Jaime received the news in a short letter, with 2 extra words written carefully at the bottom in a child's rounded hand. Mother is sorry. He sat a long time with that, knowing it could mean anything or nothing. He walked down to the galleries and watched waves wear themselves out on the same stone that had taken them yesterday and would take them tomorrow. He thought of Cersei on cold stone with people calling out names for sin as if names could substitute for bread. He thought of the way she had held her chin. He thought of how many men had enjoyed looking. He felt anger, not at gods, for gods were like the sea. Whatever else they were not personal, but at the kind of men who put on godhood like a cloak, because cloth looks holy in the right light. He threw the glove against the balustrade hard enough to ring, and then went and picked it up again because exercise of temper that breaks tools makes fools. Ravens battered the west that spring with an iron insistence. One brought news that the Ironborn had put long ships to sea in greater number, black sails freckling blue water along the shields and up toward the Mander's mouth. Another said Paxter Redwine would finally put more than words between his islands and the ocean. His triremes might swing north if he could be made to see his wine rotting in cellars for want of safe passage. Farman wrote demanding a meeting with Redwine under Lannisport's towers to show the world 2 coasts could speak without reaching for knives. Jaime wrote back that he would set a table and put a flower on it if that would coax a fleet to lash its oars to his cause. Davin sent word that the Blackfish had slipped his nets to the south, leaving 3 dead boys and a note pinned with an arrow to a birch. Lines neat as stitches. The river remembers. Davin asked for permission to set spears in hedges and wait a month if he had to. Grant it, Jaime wrote. Better to catch a fish once than to chase ripples forever. It was not victory, and it was not loss. It was weather, and he was learning to walk in it without expecting to arrive somewhere drear. He visited the school they had set in a long room once used to weave nets. A septa from a family of case masons taught letters with a patience that made him think of stone. Boys and girls shouted numbers until they stopped being afraid of their own mouths. One boy made his B backwards again and again. The septa kissed the child's hair and said, "The world will not end if you do this one thing wrong. It will end when you think doing everything right matters more than being kind." The boy blinked up at her as if she had given him a toy he had not asked for, but liked better than the ones he had wanted. Jaime watched and thought that if he ever wrote his page in the white book again, he would like that sentence written there under all the ones about horses and swords. At night, he read by firelight until the words doubled and fit over each other like scales. He read ledgers more than he had ever read poetry. He read lists of names of boys and men who had died under his command or near it, or because something he had done had blown dust into a room it had not belonged. He learned those names like a man learns the ways through his own house in the dark. Sometimes he woke speaking one, and the guard outside his door pretended he had not heard. Tommen began to write more. He sent a drawing of a ship with sails like the king's flags and a cat on the deck. He described a game Margaery had invented wherein he had to name 3 things in the room that a starving man would find and use if he had to, and at first he had said nothing, and the queen had laughed, and then shown him how to call a poker a spear, and a rug a cloak, and a loaf a map if you cut it into countries. Jaime wrote back that the game would one day win him a battle without steel. A lord from Crakehall came one day with a proposition wrapped like meat in clean words. There are those who think it better to acknowledge what your confession makes of the king and set the west above the city again under a flag that fits better in our wind. He did not say the names. Men like that never do. Jaime heard Tywin in the room like a smell. He let the man finish. Then he said, If you say anything like that under any roof I own again, I will take your tongue in front of your men and feed it to your dogs. The West will not unmake a child to make itself a hat. We are not that small. Man?" When the man had gone, pale and angry, in a way that promised letters, Lefford said, "You could have been gentler." "I was," Jaime said. "I did not call for the dogs." He walked down to the harbor that evening to watch red wine as outrider galleys sweep in, wine-colored hulls knifing the chop with a smugness that might be justified. Paxter did not come himself, but his son carried a letter with promises in it. Jaime took him up to the gallery and let him see what the sea did against the cliff and said, "I will give you safe mooring and shipwrights who know what to do with a keel if you give me oars where I need them come summer." The boy looked out. He had a face that had not yet learned to be cunning without being caught at it. "My father will say that the Reach has the sea, and the West has gold." "The West has stone," Jaime said. "Stone is dearer. You can strike sparks off it. You can build walls out of it. It remembers what pressed against it. Tell your father that if he wants this harbor as a friend, he can have it, and if he wants it as a stranger, he will row longer and get less wine for his pains." "Ben?" The boy laughed and promised to carry the threat sweetly, which was about the best one could ask of a red wine. After, he stood alone again. Fog lifted and showed stars. A gull cried with the ugly honesty of creatures that do not lie. He turned his gold and watched the starlight skitter on it like trout, and thought that if he lived to be an old man with white in his beard, there would still be men who remembered him as the Kingslayer, and boys who remembered him as the Lord who made them free of hazel on holy days. When the next letter from Kevin came, it was short and tired and bore a smear where a man's thumb had dragged across ink. "The city breathes. The Queen is quieter. The boy listens. The High Septon counts and says less. Your grain saved a week. Your men at the tooth saved 100. If you can do anything about Freys, do it with a noose that looks like something else. There are too many hallways here with ears." Jaime smiled at the line and went to the chest where he kept a carving he had hacked at with a dagger when he was 14 and unhappy with being made to read. It was a lion's head with 2 big eyes. He set it on his table, and for a strange moment was warmed by the knowledge that once he had been foolish about something harmless. A storm came 2 days later that made the harbor a bowl for fists. Waves climbed the cliff like men drunk with rage and fell back muttering. Lamps blew out, and men ran with ropes and curses. Jaime stood in the high gallery and watched lightning walk along the water like a man counting his steps. For the space of one breath he thought he saw a woman ride along the horizon, hair streaming, sword on her back, blue as a noon sky has no right to be at night, and he shook his head and told himself to stop seeing things he missed where they could not be. When morning arrived she was gone, but the idea of her had not left, and he found that he did not mind that the thought lived in a corner like a cat that did not make a mess. As spring bled into something like summer, the West began to smell of thyme and dung and men planning weddings. The school grew louder. The poorhouses emptied on warm days because men prefer sun to soup if they can get both. The sept that had been a roofless box became again a building with a bell to call people who did not always want to be called. The father's fist had been beaten into fingers. There were still thieves, of course, because there were always thieves, but fewer who pretended to be more. On a calm noon, a ship from the south put in with a banner half familiar. Jaime squinted until the threads made sense. Martell's son, dampened by salt and thyme. A man with a sardonic mouth and a scar under his eye met him on the quay and smiled as if they had already agreed to lie to each other. "Lannister," he said, giving the name the value of a coin he wasn't sure was good. "Martell?" Jaime asked. "Not fortunate enough to be a prince," the man said. "Nymerian Allyrian, lately of God's grace, and presently of the prince's temper. I am sent to see if the West remembers that ships can travel south as well as north." Jaime took him up into shade and gave him wine he would respect. "We remember," he said. "We also remember news from the south takes its time and changes as it goes." "How fares Myrcella?" "Alive," said Illyrian. "Too quickly to be cruel and too slowly to be comforting. Politics throws scorpions into cradles. We take them out and say it is for love. My prince bids me tell you that we hold no love for kings who make promises with the mouths of other men and then break them. But we hold love for girls who grow up and learn to ride well. And there is a difference." "No." "There is," Jaime said, and swallowed something sharp. They spoke in the old way, a long dance of small truths. Martell wanted trade that would not be stopped by reachmen counting their wine. The West wanted oranges when oranges were news and good steel always. Martell wanted to know whether the West would stay out of a thing if it became a thing. If Dorne called debts, other men had preferred to forget. Jaime wanted to know whether sand snakes would find King's Landing a playground again. They parted with a mutual sense that they had lied less than expected, which is one way to begin respecting a man. A raven from Davin said he had caught 2 of Brynden Tully's best men, and hanged one, and sent the other back with a nose missing, and a message. A raven from the faith asked politely, and with a tone sharpened to a hair's width, whether the rock might consider sending a relic to the capital for a festival. A golden hand of a saint who had once plucked a burning brand from a child's cradle and lost the flesh from his fingers for it. Jaime wrote back that he would sooner send his head, and signed it with a flourish that made Lefford hide a smile behind a cough. He woke one morning with a pain in his shoulder from training and a sense that something had shifted far away. He dressed and found Adam already in the hall with a face like a man who had to spit out a thing and did not want to taste it. "Kevin writes," he said, holding out parchment still damp. "He asks you to come." Jaime broke wax and read. There were not many words. The High Septon had begun to speak more softly. The city had begun to breathe in a way that did not sound like someone dying. But there were knives under furniture. There were whispers about debts that were coming due that were not coin. There were men with little birds. There was a feeling like the room had been swept and the dirt had been pushed under a heavy carpet. At the end, one line. "If you can leave, come. If you cannot, do not." There is merit in both. It was more like Kevin to tell a man what to do. It was more like Jaime now to be given a choice he could not decide in an afternoon. He went to the lion's mouth and watched the tide slip, persistent and indifferent. He thought of the boy on the throne, and the woman who had walked, and the uncle who had always stood when other men sat. He thought of the West humming under his feet with work and hunger, and knew quiet. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was still in the same place, which is one answer men get when they ask gods to move them. He sent back a letter by a raven, who took it as if it mattered less than weather. "Uncle, I will come when the West can stand a week without me, and not lose a finger to a clever thief. If you cannot wait, do what you have done since I was a boy who thought he could stop a falling tower with a lie. Hold the wall, and do not waste breath explaining to men why you do it. J." He folded that one, and did not seal it with wax. He tied it with string instead. Rough, the way men bind a cut before they can find a bandage. The day went on. Bread was baked and counted, and the smell of it inhabited corridors like a spirit men welcomed. Children in the school shouted the alphabet wrong and then right. Down in the yard, Hareth laughed at something he should not have laughed at. In the mines, water rose and fell, and pumps ached, and men with black faces sang. In Lannisport, a ship took on wine and fish and rumor, and pushed its prow toward a horizon that did not care about any of it. Jaime walked the rock and touched stone that had learned to be a house. He stopped before. Yes, the white book he had carried west in his mind, if not under his arm. And for the first time since he had left the capital, he pulled it from its niche and set it on a table. Pages opened where his hand told them to open, always to the place where his own name swam in a sea of white like a ship with no oars. He dipped the quill and wrote the next line. It was not the one a boy would have chosen. It was not the one a singer would have sung. It was plain as a ledger and sharp as a blade when a man uses it to cut bread. In the reign of Tamanai, held the West with coin and ships and law when the realm wanted to use knives. Took no crown. Paid what could be paid. Refused what could not. Kept the boy safe. He put down the quill and did not sand the words. He watched the wet ink dry very slowly, as if to remind him that even truth needs time to set. Outside, the sea did what it had always done, and would always do. Inside, a man who had been a sword and a sin and a song stood in a house made of stubbornness and memory and decided to keep standing.